And then they end up, ideally, they're trying to be in a cut, right, to lose weight and get leaner, but they completely cancel out that cut and cancel out that calorie deficit because they just end up eating whenever they're hungry because they're worried about losing their muscle. So they end up not achieving that goal either. And they just end up yo-yoing back and forth. All right, we're back with another episode. This one is going to be all about why you can't build muscle and lose fat at the same time. Now, a lot of people are going to be like, yeah, you can, dude. It's definitely possible. I saw a guy who blah, 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 or I did this, blah, blah, blah. Cool. It's impossible, other than some very specific and typically rare scenarios. So, and short-lived scenarios. I'll go through those right now. So, first scenario where this is possible is in people that are, there's kind of three scenarios that you kind of categorize it into. One is like someone who's very overweight and under-muscled, so they're not regularly working out and they're carrying a lot of body fat. So for that person, if they start working out and they decrease their calories to the point they're in a calorie deficit, those two things, they will see some level of muscle increase with fat loss at the same time for a temporary amount of time. It will not last very long, but that does happen at the start to some degree. We know that for sure. The second scenario where that happens is in someone very similar where they might not be super overweight and carry a lot of excess body fat, but they may carry some excess body fat. But the key part here is that they don't train at all. So they're very underconditioned, low level of fitness, and then they start working out, start lifting weights, and then they are also in a calorie deficit to some extent. And that type of person would also see, again, a short-lived period where they are building muscle tissue and decreasing fat tissue at the same time. But that will not extend for a very long time. And it certainly will not last for the duration of their entire, body composition journey, however long that may be. And then the third scenario where this happens is in someone who's using steroids or performance-enhancing drugs. So you could, steroids, thyroid, insulin, growth hormone, all these different performance-enhancing drugs that you could use. They make it possible to what they call, the word that we would use is like recomp. So recompositioning your body where you're changing the composition, where the body fat goes down and the muscle increases. And for you to effectively recomp, you would need to be one of the two people that I previously described, or you're using drugs. Other than that, you really cannot sustainably or consistently build muscle and lose fat at the same time for an extended period of time. This is important to understand. First of all, I'll tell you why it's not possible, and then kind of explain in practice why that actually matters, and then how you can kind of look at your own fitness journey with the correct expectations of what should be happening, how to kind of like schedule out and periodize phases of your fitness to go after some of these goals. Because people make this mistake all the time because they don't actually understand that you can't really do both at the same time beyond the beginner stages of your journey. So start with why. So this can't happen, okay? Because what we need to build muscle, we'll go through what we need to lose fat as well. But what we need to do to build muscle is, first of all, you need to stimulate the muscle hard enough. So we need to be lifting weights and training, or lifting your own body weight, whatever. You need resistance training to some extent. You need to stress the muscles out. You need to stimulate the muscle enough that it requires adaptation. It requires change. And that's from the training perspective. What we want to do is then you combine that with a situation where your food is high enough in calories that you are beyond your maintenance calories, whatever that may be for you. So for you, if you require 2,500 calories, for argument's sake, to maintain your current body weight and not go up, not go down, then you would need to be over 2,500 calories consistently and reliably over a certain period of time. Also, in the presence of the training that I just mentioned, adequately stimulating the muscle to see muscle growth. Now, there's one major change that we need to see for you to lose fat consistently, which is the training can stay the same. That doesn't need to change. This is a common mistake people make as well. So you can remember this in the meantime too, which is your training doesn't need to change whether you're gaining muscle or losing fat. So the scenario that I just gave, training could be the exact same. Stimulate the muscle, train hard, awesome, whether you're gaining muscle or losing fat. The thing that changes is the nutrition. So to build muscle, we needed, if you're someone who requires 2,500 calories to maintain your current body weight, you need that to be higher to build muscle. For you to lose fat, we need it to be under that consistently over a certain period of time to actually see consistent fat loss. And those are in contradiction to each other. The one requires the calories to be below maintenance. The other one requires them to be above maintenance. So we can't do that at the same time, which is obvious once you explain it like that, right? And that's why, very simply put, we can't achieve both of those at the same time. We got to pick one, chase it, and then go after the other one if the other one is in fact the goal at all. So that's why it can't actually happen, because we can't be in a surplus of calories over our 2,500, and then we can't be doing that at the exact same time as being under. It's one or the other, especially because you can't undulate back and forth. We need to be consistently in one, above or below, for weeks, for months, depending on how large your goal is. Now, where this is, important to be able to actually periodize or schedule out your training and schedule out your actual goals, is because people have this misunderstanding and misconception. They end up setting up their training very poorly. Well, setting up their entire fitness plan, nutrition and training, very poorly, in a way that they don't achieve either of those. So that can be a huge problem, because they end up, this is a very common scenario where people will be like, they'll go to the gym, train really hard. I want to gain a bunch of muscle. And then they add a little bit of calories in, which would be great. That's awesome. You're going to need to eat more food to gain more muscle. And then they don't feel lean. They're probably not measuring things correctly. So that's a whole other issue. They're not measuring progress well, but they feel like they're not lean. So then they give up on that, and then they're like, oh, I'm too fat, whether they are or not. They give up on the muscle building goal, when really they needed to be there for months at a time, if not longer. And they're a few weeks in and they're like, oh, I don't feel lean, so I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not seeing the changes that I want. And then they cut their calories, and then they go into a cut because they're like, oh, I want to lose weight. And then they do that, and then they're like, I cut my calories, and then they're like, oh, I'm hungry and I don't want to lose my muscle. So then they start eating, and then they end up, ideally, they're trying to be in a cut, right, to lose weight and get leaner, but they completely cancel out that cut and cancel out that calorie deficit, because they just end up eating whenever they're hungry because they're worried about losing their muscle. So they end up not achieving that goal either, and they just end up yo-yoing back and forth. So a better way to approach this is going to be literally just picking one goal or the other. And these, there's many other goals that you could choose in your fitness lifetime. But in regards to the ones we're talking about here, which is gaining muscle and losing fat, pick one or the other, and then go after that until you hit a desired outcome. So what I mean by that is, if someone's, they have a considerable amount of weight to lose, maybe 15, 20 plus pounds of weight to lose or more, then that person, I would recommend, should just choose to lose fat first, get leaner, get to a body set point that you're comfortable with, that you're happy with, and is, significant enough relative to where you started. And that may take 8, 10, 12, 16, 24, 30 weeks plus to get there. That's the important thing to understand. It's not going to take a few weeks. It's going to take a while. So you got to be consistently doing that, and in that calorie deficit to actually realize the results and see the changes. And then once you get to that point where you're like, that's how I want to look, that's how I want to feel, that's the level of leanness that I want, that's the body weight that I was aiming for, that gives me the look and feel that I want, then you shift the sales and then you go, okay, I'm now going to try and maintain this current body fat percentage, and or at least be similar, and I'm going to try and build some hard lean muscle. Now, what you do is you don't necessarily need to change your training too much. There's probably some subtle changes you can make, but you don't really need to, assuming you're already training hard. Is now you're just going to add some food back in because that is required for muscle growth. And you're probably going to feel fluffy some days. You're probably going to feel fat some days. It doesn't mean you are. And this is why it's important to take, progress photos, take your body weight every single day and track the weekly averages over time, potentially taking measurements like your waist measurement around your belly button, and tracking those things regularly to see how am I actually moving, because you don't want to get into this place where you feel a certain way and then you make a decision on your fitness goals based on, an emotion at the end of the day because you're full of food and you feel fat, right? It's a common thing. A lot of people have probably felt like that. I have too. You're full of food at the end of the day. You're like, oh my goodness, I'm fat. So you wake up in the morning, you're like, oh, I actually look pretty good. Okay. Good thing I don't just go off the emotions that I felt last night after dinner, But that's kind of it in a nutshell of like how you want to understand this and then integrate it into your fitness journey. I'll give you a good example for like me personally. So when I was my heaviest, and I deliberately was trying to gain weight, strength was my number one goal. Building muscle was my, simultaneously number one goal. Get more jacked, get stronger. And I was doing that, and I got up to 213 to 215 November of last year. And I was like, okay, I don't feel great anymore. This was a goal. This is the heaviest I've been. I wanted to do that. So I achieved that. Great. I'm going to shift now into a fat loss phase. And I'd previously allowed myself 16 plus months to be in a caloric surplus and deliberately eat over my maintenance calories to gain weight consistently. And I was tracking all of the things I needed to make sure that I was doing that. And once I got to that point where I'm like, oh my goodness, I've gained a bunch of weight. I went from 175-ish to 215. And once I did that, I was like, great. I'm in a place where I'm excited to lean out now. I'm carrying extra body fat that I would like to get rid of. And so once I did that, I used actually the exact same strategies that I use with all of my clients in my one-on-one coaching program called the Anti-Diet Diet Program. So it doesn't involve tracking or counting calories. It involves basically leveraging mindset, perspective around food, and the actual habits and behaviors that we have around food and changing how we eat, not just what we eat. And I did that exact same thing. So I just personalized it to me like I would personalize to each one of my clients. And then I stayed consistent with it. I did it for 4 months and I lost almost 30 pounds. I think it was 28, 29 pounds I lost in the 16 weeks. And when I was done the 16 weeks, I was like, perfect. This is a good number for me. This is a good look for me. This is a good feel for me. I feel and look exactly how I want. I'm happy with this. And then since then, I'm maintaining around 4 to 5 pounds just above where I ended that cut. And we're a good April, May, June, July, August, September. So almost 6 months from when I ended that cut. And I've added about 5 pounds, which is nice and consistent and pretty conservative actually. So, and that's what I wanted. I wanted to maintain or be pretty close to my body fat percentage that I ended the diet on, which I'm pretty close. And we can tell because of progress photos, how clothes are fitting, but also my body weight is just not going up very quickly, which was the goal when I shifted into this. So right now, the goal is not to lose weight. The goal is to maintain my current body fat percentage or stay within a reasonable limit and gain muscle mass. So that's been the goal for the last little while. And then if I get to a point where I do want to push the muscle growth and strength a little more aggressively, then I would just add more calories and I would have to be comfortable with putting on a little bit more body fat. And then also understanding that when I get to a point where I'm happy with that, I can shift then, like what I did last time. I can shift back into a cutting phase, shift into a fat loss phase. And this is important to make these shifts back and forth. Now, everyone won't be moving into a cut phase or a bulk phase or a cut phase or muscle building phase or whatever for the rest of their life. For athletes, they may, but for the average person, you may do a couple of those in your life, maybe 3 max. But for most people, it's if you're overweight and you're under muscled, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to just set your fitness plan in general up so that you can actually lose fat, lose weight consistently for however long you need to lose the amount of weight that you need to. And then the goal is to kind of make that shift that I made, which is you just shift into kind of like a looser maintenance period where all of the habits and the strategies and the routines that you'd set up on your diet phase you're going to repeat those exactly as is into your maintenance phase once you're done the diet. But you're probably just going to loosen up on maybe 1 or 2 things that you wouldn't have done on your diet plan. Good example is like maybe you allowed yourself 1 or 2 snacks a week, or maybe you had 1 or 2 free meals per week that were off your plan. Maybe you have an extra free meal now that you're on a maintenance, or maybe you have some extra snacks and you deliberately decide what those snacks are. Or maybe you leave room for, I don't know, something else. Maybe you go out, get takeout or go out to a restaurant an extra time per week or an extra time per month relative to what you had set up for you in a diet phase. So that's just an example of like how you could set it up. But you probably won't be in a situation, if you do it correctly, you probably won't be in a situation where you have to lose fat again because you have all of these strategies in place and they only become easier and easier to maintain with more time, which is why that I've kind of designed my coaching program the way that it is it's not something that gets harder the longer you do it. A lot of people have that with their diet plans is like the longer they do it, the harder it is. And then inevitably they're just waiting until they give up on it and then they gain weight and they have to diet again. It's like the way that I've set things up because the way that I approach health and I approach weight loss with my clients, the longer they practice these things, the easier it is. And actually the harder it is to derail and give up. So it actually gets easier and easier to sustain the longer and longer they sustain it. It's kind of self-feeding and it's self-propelling, which is so much easier when you realize that time is actually on your side. You're not just waiting to fail because it's only going to get easier from here. But yeah, going back to like why you can't build muscle and lose fat at the same time. There's an important thing to understand. I had this conversation with a client not too long ago because she was confused about this and she wasn't necessarily seeing the changes she wanted. And I didn't realize it was because of her expectations around this. So I had to break this down for her and been like, hey, where you're at right now, based on your goals, this is what we're expecting to see. And then it made a lot more sense for her. And it gave her some clarity around like what she's actually trying to do and what she should expect to see. And it was that clarity, I think, just went a long way for her in understanding this. So I think for a lot of people, this is really important to understand. One thing I would add to this is that when you are going to lose body weight, when you're going to lose body fat, you will lose muscle. And a lot of people are like, oh my goodness, I don't want to lose muscle. It's like, yeah, nobody wants to lose muscle. We shouldn't be losing muscle. Most people are not nearly well muscled enough to want to lose any of it, right? Especially when you consider how hard it is to build muscle. The fact of the matter is that you will lose some muscle when you're losing weight. So you can't preserve all of it. But what we can do things within our control to preserve as much of the muscle mass as we can. Things like eating adequate protein consistently every day, working out consistently and stimulating the muscle hard enough. So trying hard enough and making sure your effort is high with your training. You don't need to train more. You just need to train harder to do that. And those are 2 of the best things that you can do for it. There's some other small things, but the 2 big levers that affect that are going to be protein and it's going to be training. So those 2 things, if they're in place during a diet phase, you will actually preserve most of your muscle. You will not preserve all of it, but you will preserve the vast majority of it while you're losing fat. So a lot of people, it is important to understand because a lot of people get caught into that trap while they're losing weight and losing fat where they're like, oh no, I'm losing my muscle. And usually it's a feeling. I feel like I'm losing my muscle. I feel like I'm getting too skinny. I feel weaker. It's like, yeah, you will be weaker sometimes in the gym. That's fine. But when you'll look flatter too. Your muscles will just look smaller because you have less calories in you, which is what's required to achieve the goal of weight loss. So once you understand that, you can kind of just stay consistent with the goal without getting derailed based on your emotions or how you feel based on certain days, and not feel like, oh my goodness, I'm just too hungry, so I'm just gonna eat, and then that ends up canceling out, your calorie deficit that you were previously consistently in, and is what is required to actually achieve the goal of weight loss. And that happens to so many people. They just end up doing that and then canceling all those calories out, and now they're in a cut phase, or at least that's what their objective is, but they don't end up seeing any changes because they eat every time they're hungry, because either they can't manage hunger in a healthy way, they haven't learned how to manage hunger in a healthy way, or they have this fear around losing muscle or being weaker in the gym, and they feel like they need to be well fed to do that. And that belief about being well fed means that they're just going to be eating a lot more than they need to actually lose the weight. So then they end up never achieving either goal. Then you go back to the person that I described before, where kind of like a hypothetical scenario, but it's a common one you see in people in the gym all the time, where it's like they go to gain muscle, and they're not consistent enough with their protein, or they're not training hard enough, or they feel too fat, so then they don't eat enough calories some days, and then they end up just eating at maintenance, and then they never actually see the changes for months on end that they actually want. And then at some point they're like, I feel fat, so then they go into a cutting phase, even while they didn't even put on enough muscle in the meantime. And then they go into a cutting phase, and then they end up in a situation like what I just described before. And then they end up just canceling out those calories. So then you're going back and forth, yo-yoing between building muscle, losing fat, but achieving neither. So you just got to make that hard, consistent effort and commitment to one of those goals, spend weeks or months there. And then when you get to a point where you're like, this is a reasonable point to change based on the goals that I've hit here, body fat percentage, how you look, how you feel, how long you've been at that goal, and then shift into the next one. Hopefully this helps you. This is an important, I think, concept to understand, because this is a common misconception a lot of people have. And to be honest, if you're not carrying excess body weight and excess body fat, and you're also not a beginner, then you're not going to be putting on muscle and losing fat at the same time. Or if you're not on steroids, that would help as well. That would make this achievable for sure if you choose to take steroids. But assuming you're not taking steroids, and you're not a complete beginner in the gym, and you're not carrying excess body weight, then you can't do these things. And even if you are someone who, I work with a lot of people they're overweight, they are beginners in the gym, so they actually do put on a little bit of muscle and lose fat at the same time. But even then, it doesn't really, that knowing that exists doesn't really serve us very well, because while they do that, maybe for the first few weeks, I don't know how long, but it's going to be very temporary in the grand scheme of things. So even while that does actually happen, it doesn't happen for very long. So it doesn't really serve us very well to care about that. What we want to still look at is, we're trying to preserve muscle as best we can while we're losing fat, but keeping calories low enough that we're in a caloric deficit consistently. And then doing that long enough until you get to that body weight and body fat percentage point where you're like, this is where I want to be. This is how I want to look, and this is how I want to feel. And then if at that point you want to build more muscle, you shift back into that, and you add a little bit of food in, while basically the goal there would be to maintain a lot of the habits and healthy routines that you had previously developed and practiced and put in place during the diet phase. So hopefully this helps you. If you have any questions about this, just send me a DM on Instagram at I am Tim Walcott. I'd be happy to offer you as much advice as I can around this, because again, this is like a super, super common misconception. So if you're, hopefully you understood kind of how I was describing that and explaining that. But if you need a little bit more context around that, just let me know, and I'd be happy to chat with you. If you're watching this episode on YouTube, then make sure you like and subscribe, leave a comment down below. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple, please take this episode right now, go to the share button, share this to your Instagram and your Facebook. If you throw it up on Instagram stories, tag at Stay Peaked, and we'll repost you. It'd be freaking awesome. It'll help us get this show out to more people, and we'd love to connect with you that way as well. So thanks again for listening. Much love. Appreciate you guys.